The night sky over Portland, Oregon, is broken by the wail of sirens. Red and blue lights flash against the corrugated metal walls of a derelict warehouse along the Willamette River. Yellow "Do Not Cross" tape flutters in the damp wind as uniformed officers fan out across the cracked pavement. A police K-9 barks from the loading dock, its handler tugging hard on the leash. Reporters hover at the edge of the scene, their lenses aimed at the boarded windows. To them, this looks like another overdose, maybe a homeless encampment gone wrong. But the faces of the first officers inside tell a different story, one of absolute horror. Inside the warehouse, beneath rusted iron beams, a staircase spirals down into a hidden basement. The air is thick with the chemical sting of formalin and acrylic paint. Rows of spotlights are fixed to the ceiling, all aimed at what appears to be a macabre art gallery. 5 women, motionless, pale, preserved, are posed like sculptures in glass cases and wooden frames. One hangs upside down, a grotesque smile painted on her lips. Another is frozen in clear resin, her arms extended as if mid-ballet. Each installation bears a title card in precise handwriting: Frozen Perfection, The Joy Strangled, I Am No Longer Myself. The central conflict emerges immediately. This isn't just murder, it's performance. A case that seemed at first to be another missing person report is about to reveal a labyrinth of art, obsession, and death. One of the most disturbing exhibitions ever uncovered on American soil. Just months before this discovery, Portland's art community had been thriving. Galleries popped up in old warehouses, pop-up exhibitions brought in young crowds, and social media influencers turned abandoned spaces into canvases of self-expression. But amid the vibrancy, a darker pattern began to take shape, one that only came into focus in hindsight. Between late 2023 and early 2024, 6 young women disappeared. Their names barely hit the news cycle. They were students, freelance models, photographers, women in their early 20s, often working alone and late at night, hustling to make a career in a competitive industry. No bodies, no ransom demands, no sign of foul play. Families filed missing person reports, but detectives had little to work with. That all changed with the case of Emily Harper, a 22-year-old dancer from Portland State University. Emily had been practicing late for a modern dance showcase. She texted her boyfriend, Daniel Miller, around 11 o'clock p.m. Done for tonight, heading home. But she never made it back. Miller tracked her phone's GPS signal using a location-sharing app, and it led him here, to the abandoned warehouse. What he saw through the half-open steel door sent him running for help. Within the hour, the Portland Police Bureau had sealed off the block, and the FBI's Portland field office was alerted. The basement floor was treated like a bomb site. Evidence markers lined the concrete, dozens of them. Every step was photographed, every inch scanned by the crime scene unit's 3D laser mapping equipment. Forensic photographers moved slowly, capturing the victims from multiple angles under different lighting. DNA swabs were taken from doorknobs, light switches, and the mannequins scattered between the installations. Officers dusted for prints on the glass display cases. Fibers were collected from the duct tape still attached to one victim's wrist. On the walls, detectives found handwritten notes taped beside each body. The notes weren't confessions or manifestos. They were descriptions, like something you'd find in an art museum. Commentary on posture, light, emotion, composition. One read, "The beauty of fear lies in its silence." Meanwhile, uniformed officers canvassed the surrounding blocks. A homeless man claimed he'd seen a tall figure wheeling a cart into the warehouse around 2 o'clock a.m. But his description was vague. hoodie, gloves, mask. Another witness, a night shift security guard across the river, remembered strange blue flashes of light inside the warehouse weeks earlier, like a photo shoot, but creepier. Everything about the scene screamed planning. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was methodical, theatrical, staged. Whoever created this gallery had prepared it for an audience. If not in person, then perhaps online. By dawn, forensic techs had matched fingerprints and dental records to 5 of the missing women. Rachel Myers, 23, a freelance photographer who had last been seen heading to a late-night shoot. Samantha Brooks, 25, an art student who vanished after attending a downtown gallery opening. Jenna Alvarez, 22, an aspiring model, gone after accepting what friends thought was a simple portfolio job. Olivia Tran, 24, a stylist known for late-night collaborations with local musicians. Hannah Klein, 26, a painter whose car had been found abandoned weeks earlier near the same industrial district. But one name was missing: Emily Harper. The woman whose disappearance led police to this basement was not among the dead. Her absence raised a chilling question. Was she still alive? Or was she being held for the next exhibition? The FBI's Evidence Response Team, ERT, joined Portland PD in processing the site. Unlike in many countries, American investigators rely heavily on overlapping jurisdiction. The Portland police handled local witness interviews, while federal agents took over digital evidence, scanning every electrical wire, camera mount, and storage device in the basement. Tech agents traced the stripped network cables to a concealed server rack, suggesting the space had been used for live streaming. Though the drives were gone, the setup matched known equipment used in underground dark web broadcasts. Every body was transported in climate-controlled vans to the Oregon State Medical Examiner's office, where autopsies would reveal a chilling consistency. Each victim had been injected with a neuromuscular blocking agent, paralyzing them while leaving them conscious, long enough to be posed like living statues. Back at the precinct, detectives took Daniel Miller's statement. He insisted he was only there to look for Emily, but investigators noticed something off. Miller described the basement lighting as perfectly staged, with top-down spotlights, a detail that had not been released. He claimed he couldn't help but notice how theatrical it looked. That comment was entered into the case file immediately. Meanwhile, Emily's family begged investigators to keep searching, believing she was still alive. Her best friend told police Emily had been excited about a new opportunity. Someone had reached out offering to film a dance project, a supposed collaboration with an award-winning independent artist. No one could verify the artist's name. This was no ordinary missing person case. This was an exhibition of death, crafted by a killer who believed murder was art. The investigation had only just begun, and already the evidence pointed toward a carefully choreographed plan, one that could still be in motion. And the most disturbing detail? The killer might not be working alone. You're watching Shadows and Clues, where we decode the most mysterious cases, one chilling file at a time. What began with a single missing woman had now opened the door to a nightmare. 5 bodies, an art gallery of horror, and one woman still unaccounted for. The crime scene offered dozens of clues, but also contradictions. And as investigators soon learned, these seemingly disconnected details would lead them to an unexpected turning point, one that would expose not just a killer, but a collaborator hiding in plain sight. The morning after this warehouse discovery, the Portland Police Bureau's Homicide Unit and the FBI's Evidence Response Team, ERT, found themselves buried under an avalanche of data. Every bag of evidence, every fingerprint lift, every witness statement had to be scrutinized. This was not just about identifying a killer. It was about racing against time to determine whether Emily Harper, the missing dancer, was still alive. By noon, the Oregon State Forensic Lab began delivering its first reports. Fingerprints. Technicians recovered partial prints on a dismantled camera tripod, as well as smudges on the resin cases holding the bodies. But nearly all of them had been wiped clean. The few intact samples didn't match any of the victims, nor anyone in the National CODIS fingerprint database. The absence of a match was frustrating, but it also meant something crucial. The perpetrator was cautious, but not perfect. 2. Chemical residue. Swabs taken from the acrylic cases contained traces of eucalyptus oil, commonly used in art studios to mask the odor of solvents. Residue of formalin and silicone-based adhesive confirmed what the medical examiner suspected. The bodies had been preserved and posed like sculptures. 3. Phone data. Investigators pulled metadata from the victims' phones, all of which had been powered off shortly before their disappearances. But one anomaly stood out. On the night Emily vanished, her phone pinged a cell tower across the river, a location inconsistent with her supposed route home. Even stranger, someone had removed the SIM card and powered the device back on briefly at 3:14 a.m., nearly 2 hours after Emily was last seen alive. 4. Security cameras. Detectives canvassed businesses and traffic cams along the industrial strip. A grainy recording from a freight company showed a man pushing a hand truck stacked with covered crates into the warehouse at 1:47 a.m. His hoodie was pulled low, face obscured, gloves on. But there was one oddity. The footage captured him glancing up at the security camera and adjusting his posture as if he knew he was being filmed. Witness interviews began producing contradictions. Daniel Miller, Emily's boyfriend, repeated his story. Emily texted him at 11 o'clock p.m. He tracked her phone, and when she didn't arrive, he went searching. But detectives noticed his timeline kept shifting. In one version, he said he found the warehouse around 12:30 a.m., in another, closer to 1 o'clock a.m. The gap seemed small, but in a case this precise, every minute mattered. The homeless man, who'd seen the suspect with a cart, insisted the figure was tall, maybe 6'2", real skinny. But when pressed, he admitted he'd been drinking heavily that night and couldn't say for sure. A barista, working a late shift at a coffee stand nearby, remembered seeing Emily earlier that evening. She recalled Emily mentioning she was meeting someone about a project, but the name Emily dropped didn't match anyone known in the Portland arts community. Each account added threads to the case file, but they didn't weave neatly together. Instead, they made the timeline more tangled and suspicions more pointed. By the end of the first week, investigators had narrowed down 3 names. 1. Daniel Miller, the boyfriend who reported Emily missing. Pros, he appeared cooperative, handed over his phone, even encouraged police to check his apartment. Cons, he was too cooperative. Detectives noted how Miller answered questions before they were finished asking. He offered long, unnecessary details, as if rehearsed. Most troubling, his phone data showed he had searched Portland abandoned warehouses weeks before Emily's disappearance. 2. Professor Ethan Cross, a disgraced former art student turned adjunct instructor. Cross had been expelled from an MFA program years earlier for a controversial thesis simulating women's deaths as performance art. Since then, he'd kept a low profile, occasionally teaching workshops on lighting and installation. His academic colleagues described him as brilliant, but disturbingly fixated on mortality as art. He had no direct tie to the victims yet, but investigators discovered that 3 of the women had once attended a photography lecture he gave at a downtown co-op. 3. Vincent Vin Torres, a 29-year-old freelance photographer. Torres had collaborated with at least 2 of the victims in the past. He was known for his moody, avant-garde shoots and had once been accused of harassment by a model, though charges were never filed. A search of his Instagram revealed he had followed all 6 missing women. Detectives subpoenaed his records, discovering late-night message exchanges with Emily Harper just weeks before she vanished. Detectives began interrogating each person of interest. Daniel Miller sat across from investigators with an unnerving calm. When asked about his relationship with Emily, he described it clinically, almost like a case study. She was ambitious, restless, searching for meaning. He referred to her in the past tense, was, even though she was still officially listed as missing. When pressed about his late-night warehouse search, Miller claimed he had a gut feeling about the location. Investigators countered, "How would you know which warehouse, out of dozens in the district, to search?" His reply, "I just knew. Emily's sense of aesthetics, the way she gravitated to spaces like that. I figured she'd be drawn to it." The explanation struck the lead detective as too philosophical, too detached, more like an art critic than a frantic boyfriend. Ethan Cross, by contrast, played the eccentric intellectual. In his interview, he mocked the investigators' questions, saying, "If you're accusing me of murder, you clearly don't understand art." He admitted to giving lectures attended by some victims, but dismissed the connection as coincidence. "Artists flock together," he sneered. Still, when agents asked about his whereabouts on the nights of the disappearances, his alibis were vague, supported only by being at home grading papers. Vincent Torres came across as defensive, even hostile. He denied any involvement, insisting his contact with Emily was strictly professional. But when confronted with the messages he'd sent, late-night invites to exclusive shoots, offers to capture your rawest self, he grew combative. Detectives noticed his hands shook when asked if he'd ever been inside the warehouse district. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, BAU, led by Special Agent Marcus Hale, reviewed the evidence. Their profile suggested the killer was male, mid to late 20s or early 30s, educated in the arts or design, methodical, controlling, but socially withdrawn. Likely had technical knowledge of lighting and stagecraft, motivated by a desire to create immortal art through death. Hale's team leaned toward Ethan Cross as the prime suspect. His academic background, obsession with mortality, and history of controversial projects fit the profile perfectly. But Hale wasn't satisfied. Something about Miller's composure gnawed at him. "Innocent men beg for us to find their girlfriends," Hale noted. "They don't sit here describing light angles." A breakthrough came from digital forensics. Analysts retrieved fragments of deleted data from the warehouse's concealed server rack. Buried in the corrupted files was a test live stream from months earlier, a 30-second clip of an empty room, spotlights flickering on, audio crackling. In the background, a male voice gave directions. "Left light, softer. No, angle it 23 degrees. Perfect." The voice wasn't Ethan Cross. It wasn't Vincent Torres. It was Daniel Miller. When agents confronted him with the audio, Miller didn't flinch. He simply smiled and said, "I have a good ear for light." His nonchalant response sent a chill through the room. By now, the investigation was circling 2 men. Ethan Cross, the artist with motive and ideology. Daniel Miller, the boyfriend whose perfect cooperation felt more like performance. Torres, while troubling, lacked physical evidence tying him to the crime scene. He remained on the list, but further down. Agents now faced a critical decision. Move in on Miller, risking that Emily Harper might still be alive and hidden somewhere, or keep surveillance while trying to locate Cross, the ideological architect. Detectives thought they had their suspects boxed in. Motive, profile, digital evidence. It all seemed to point their way. But as the case file thickened, so did the contradictions. Just when investigators began to believe they were closing the circle, a new piece of evidence surfaced. Something so unexpected, it threatened to turn the entire investigation upside down. The investigation was already balancing on a razor's edge. Daniel Miller's voice, on the recovered test footage, had shifted suspicion sharply toward him, but the FBI still couldn't ignore the eerie shadow of Ethan Cross, the disgraced art instructor. It seemed like the case was ready to snap shut until a new piece of evidence surfaced, one that would blow the timeline wide open. During a second sweep of the warehouse basement, a forensic technician noticed a false panel in the corner wall, its outline just barely visible beneath layers of gray paint. Behind it lay a small steel locker bolted into the concrete. The door had been crudely forced shut with industrial adhesive, but the evidence team pried it open. Inside was a cache of items. A set of latex gloves with faint traces of sweat preserved inside. A USB drive, partially melted, as if someone had tried to destroy it. And most disturbing of all, a canvas duffel bag containing women's clothing, including a stage costume belonging to Emily Harper. The bag was tagged immediately and rushed to the lab. Initial DNA tests revealed both Emily's genetic material and another unknown male profile. This was critical. It meant Emily had almost certainly been inside the warehouse recently, and at least one perpetrator had handled her belongings directly. The melted USB was painstakingly restored by the FBI's Digital Forensics Unit. What they uncovered was devastating. Fragments of video files, each labeled like acts in a play. Act 1, the smile. Act 2, the resin, and so on. The fragments matched the installations in the basement, proving the murders had been recorded for an audience. But there was more. One file, Act 6, was incomplete. Only 30 seconds long, showing Emily Harper entering a dimly lit room. The clip cut off abruptly, suggesting her performance hadn't been finished. If Emily's murder had been interrupted, then there was a chance she was still alive. But the USB also raised a chilling question. Who was the intended audience? The discovery of Emily's clothing inside the warehouse created immediate inconsistencies in Daniel Miller's story. He had insisted Emily vanished before he ever arrived there. But if her belongings were already hidden inside, it implied either 1. Miller had known she was taken there earlier than he admitted, or 2. He had been directly involved in placing the items himself. When confronted with this contradiction, Miller doubled down on his rehearsed calm. He said, "If her things were in there, then obviously she was brought there after I left. That's all I can tell you." But investigators weren't convinced. The duffel bag was coated in dust, matching the layer on the basement floor, proving it had been in the hidden locker for weeks, not hours. Miller's alibi was unraveling. Meanwhile, detectives tracked down a former student of Ethan Cross, a woman named Clara Jennings. She testified that Cross had once invited her to participate in a private art project that sounded eerily similar to the installations in the warehouse. She declined, but she remembered something striking. He said he needed someone to help with the technical side, a friend who understood light and angles better than anyone else. That friend's name? Daniel Miller. Clara's account placed the two men in contact years earlier, long before Emily vanished. Suddenly, the boyfriend wasn't just a concerned partner caught up in tragedy. He might have been working alongside Cross the entire time. As the evidence mounted, the suspect's behavior began to change. Ethan Cross, once arrogant and mocking, became uncharacteristically quiet in subsequent interviews. He refused to answer questions about his old thesis project, staring at the table instead of his interrogators. The man who once relished provoking authorities now acted like someone guarding a secret too big to expose. Vincent Torres, the photographer, grew defensive when questioned about his online activity. Agents discovered he was a member of several private art forums, some of which had threads discussing the exhibition murders before the media ever released details. Torres claimed he only lurked and never posted. But his silence about the groups earlier raised red flags. And then there was Daniel Miller. His cooperative facade began to crack. When shown a still image from the incomplete Act 6 video, he leaned forward, lips tightening. Investigators noted his pupils dilated, his hands gripped the table, and for the first time, his voice faltered. Instead of answering directly, he asked, "Where did you find that?" That reaction was logged as a critical behavioral shift, a sign Miller knew far more than he was willing to admit. At this stage, investigators had to confront a terrifying realization. This was not the work of a lone serial killer. It was a collaborative enterprise. Cross supplied the ideology, the warped artistic vision. Miller handled the technical side, setting up lights, cameras, staging. Torres may have recruited victims through photo shoot offers. And still, digital evidence hinted at an even larger audience, hidden somewhere on the dark web. The exhibition murders weren't just crimes. They were performances designed for consumption. And the missing Act 6 meant the show wasn't over. With Emily's fate hanging in the balance, pressure from the media and the victims' families intensified. Headlines called the killers the death curators, and public anger rose daily. Politicians demanded faster results. Inside the task force, tensions flared. Some agents pushed to arrest Miller immediately, fearing Emily was running out of time. Others argued they needed more evidence to uncover the full scope of the conspiracy. Special Agent Marcus Hale, the profiler, summed it up grimly. "We're not chasing a man. We're dismantling a production. If we rush this, we'll miss the director behind the curtain." Still, silence from the suspects was suffocating progress. Miller smirked his way through inconsistencies. Cross refused to talk. Torres hid behind half-truths. The wall of lies and omissions grew thicker by the hour. Investigators knew they had to change strategy. Instead of chasing fragments, they would go straight at the weak point, break one suspect, and the rest of the facade would collapse. And so, with pressure at its peak and public outrage mounting, the task force prepared for its boldest move yet. They would conduct a decisive interrogation, a psychological offensive designed to corner the truth, no matter how deep it was buried. The task force had reached a breaking point. For weeks, Daniel Miller played the role of a calm, rational partner. Too calm, too rational. But the discovery of Emily Harper's belongings, the incomplete Act 6 footage, and his voice directing lighting tests painted a chilling picture. Still, suspicion wasn't enough. The investigators needed a confession. The Portland FBI field office prepared for a decisive move. They would place Miller in a controlled interrogation, not to ask, but to break. The interrogation room was textbook American procedure. A small, gray space with a single table. Fluorescent light above, camera rolling in the corner. A mirror along one wall, concealing agents and profilers behind the glass. Special Agent Marcus Hale took point, using the Reed technique, a method rooted in psychological confrontation and persuasion. The strategy was clear. Establish control, confront with certainty, isolate contradictions, and offer Miller a path to admission without framing him as the monster. The moment Miller was escorted in, he looked composed, hands folded, posture upright. But Hale had seen this before. Composure wasn't strength. It was armor, and armor could be cracked. Hale began without pleasantries. "Daniel, we know you were in that warehouse before the police ever got there. We know your voice gave the lighting directions. And we know Emily's clothes were found in the hidden locker." For the first time, Miller's expression twitched. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and said, "You're mistaken. I was only there to look for Emily. If her things were inside, then she must have been taken there later. Hale leaned in. Daniel, the dust on that duffel bag shows it had been there for weeks. Weeks. That means you lied. And liars don't lie for strangers. They lie for themselves. Miller stared at the table, silent. The armor was holding, but cracks had appeared. The interrogation team layered the facts like bricks, each one tightening the box around Miller. The USB drive. Hale slid photos across the table, stills from Act 6, Emily entering the room. You said you were searching for her that night, but this video shows her already in the set you helped build. She was there because you led her there. Miller shifted uncomfortably. That's not me, he whispered. The audio fragment. Agents played the recovered clip, his unmistakable voice giving lighting instructions. Hale pressed. This isn't Cross. This isn't Torres. This is you. You don't need to lie. We already know. Miller looked down at his hands. For the first time, his fingers trembled. The timeline contradiction. Hale presented cell tower data, proving Miller's phone had pinged near the warehouse long before he claimed to have arrived. You weren't searching for Emily. You were waiting for her. Silence filled the room. Then a sigh. A long, slow exhale, as if Miller's mask was slipping. The Reed technique often softens the cornering with justification, offering the suspect a less evil narrative to latch onto. Hale leaned back, his voice lower, calmer. Daniel, we know you didn't plan this alone. Ethan Cross manipulated you. He was the director, the visionary. You were just the technician, the man who made the lights work. You didn't kill Emily. You just helped stage what he demanded. For the first time, Miller raised his eyes. They glistened, but not with tears, more like relief at hearing a lifeline. Yes, he murmured. I helped. Bit by bit, the truth spilled out. Miller described how Ethan Cross had approached him years ago, selling the idea of immortal art through fear. At first, Miller dismissed it, but after losing a major job in film production, he began helping Cross with lighting setups, just for practice. The practice became projects. Projects became performances. And performances became murders. At first, Miller insisted he never saw the women die. I left before the final act, he claimed. But Hale pushed harder, presenting autopsy evidence showing victims were paralyzed but conscious when posed. Daniel, you saw their eyes. You knew they were alive. You didn't walk away from that. You adjusted the lights. Miller's shoulders slumped. His voice cracked. Yes, I saw. I saw everything. As Miller spoke, investigators pieced together his account into a chilling reconstruction. Emily Harper arrived at the warehouse expecting a late-night dance rehearsal. Cross wore a mask, silent. Miller handled the lights, telling her it was just a test shoot. She laughed nervously, asking if the camera was rolling. Cross stepped behind her with a thin wire. Miller couldn't watch, but he heard the muffled gasp. Emily collapsed, injected with a paralyzing agent. Still alive. Still aware. Miller moved quickly, adjusting the spotlight. He positioned her body in a graceful arch, arms raised as if caught mid-performance. Cross whispered, perfect, eternal. Miller confessed he used adhesive to keep Emily's eyes open, so the spotlight would capture the terror in them. The flashback ended with Miller describing his last memory, Emily's pupils reflecting the light, her chest barely moving. She looked immortal, he said, voice shaking. Hale pressed one last time. Daniel, where is she now? Where is Emily Harper's body? Miller hesitated, then whispered, she's not in the warehouse. Ethan moved her, said the final act wasn't ready. He kept her in the cold room across the river. That was the breakthrough investigators needed. Miller had just confirmed the existence of a secondary site. By the end of 6 grueling hours, Miller admitted to setting up lighting and cameras for the exhibitions, assisting in staging victims, including Emily Harper, concealing evidence inside the warehouse locker. But he pinned the ultimate murders on Ethan Cross. "I never held the wire. That was Ethan, always Ethan." The confession didn't absolve him, but it was enough to move forward. Miller was booked as an accomplice to multiple counts of homicide. Investigators wrote in the case file, Miller demonstrates traits of rationalization and detachment. He frames his role as technical support, denying responsibility for actual killings. However, his knowledge of victim staging, chemical use, and concealment confirms full complicity. Subject views victims not as people, but as visual subjects, showing deep psychological distortion. If you want to follow more thrilling cases like this, subscribe to Shadows and Clues. Each week, we break down the world's most chilling mysteries, one case file at a time. Daniel Miller's confession cracked the case wide open. But the truth inside the interrogation room was only half the story. For justice to be served, the evidence and the confessions had to stand the test of a courtroom. And that battle was about to begin. The confession was damning, but in America's justice system, a confession alone never seals the case. Every word had to survive cross-examination. Every detail had to withstand the scrutiny of law. When the trial of Daniel Miller and Ethan Cross opened in a packed federal courtroom in Portland, the nation was watching. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Karen Whitfield, framed the case as a theater of cruelty masquerading as art. She presented the jury with photos of the staged bodies, clips of the corrupted live streams, and Miller's recorded admission, "I saw everything." Her voice never wavered when she declared, "These men did not just kill, they curated death for an audience." The defense attorneys fought back hard. Miller's lawyer portrayed him as a technician caught in a madman's vision, claiming he was manipulated by Cross and feared retaliation if he refused. Cross's defense leaned on academic freedom, arguing his fascination with death was theoretical, not criminal. His attorney even suggested the real killer could have been an unknown third party from the dark web forums. The prosecution countered with forensic precision. FBI agents testified about the fingerprints, chemical residues, and digital trails. Forensic pathologists described the paralytic injections that left victims aware but helpless. A cyber analyst explained how the hidden server was tied to crypto transactions linked directly to Miller's accounts. Several witnesses swayed the jury with raw emotion. Clara Jennings, the former student, testified how Cross once spoke of using real bodies in art. Her voice shook as she said, he believed death was the only authentic medium. Parents of the victims described the torment of unanswered calls, missing posters, and the horror of learning their daughters were sculpted. The courtroom fell silent when one mother held up her daughter's ballet shoes, the same shoes found in the duffel bag. And finally, Special Agent Marcus Hale himself took the stand. He described the interrogation process, Miller's behavioral cracks, and the cold way he recounted staging victims' eyes for the spotlight. Hale told the jury, "I've spoken to killers before, but this case, it was the first time I heard someone describe murder like a camera shot." The jury deliberated for 3 days, weighed down by the complexity of accomplice liability. Some jurors initially hesitated, wondering whether Miller's role was truly that of a murderer or merely an accessory. But the digital files, the lighting diagrams, the voice recordings, the unfinished Act 6 erased those doubts. The final agreement was unanimous. Ethan Cross was convicted on 5 counts of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and production of obscene material for distribution on the dark web. His sentence, death by lethal injection under federal law. Daniel Miller was convicted on 5 counts of second-degree murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The jury accepted that he hadn't physically strangled the victims, but his direct role in staging and enabling the crimes made him equally responsible. His sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom erupted when the sentences were read. Families wept, some shouted in relief. Others simply sat in stunned silence, as though justice, no matter how heavy, could never balance the horror they had endured. After the trial, Special Agent Hale gave a rare interview. He admitted the outcome brought closure, but not peace. Justice was served, he said, but it doesn't erase what those women went through. It doesn't erase the fact that for weeks, we weren't just dealing with killers. We were dealing with directors. They wrote scripts for death. And that, to me, is more haunting than any verdict. For Hale, the trial reinforced one lesson. Evil doesn't always come with rage or chaos. Sometimes, it comes meticulously staged, with a spotlight overhead and an audience hidden in the shadows. The jury had spoken. The gavel had fallen. But even with the verdict reached and the killers sentenced, the echoes of the case refused to fade. Because long after the courtroom doors closed, the scars of the exhibition murders lingered in families, in investigators, and in a community that would never look at art or at darkness the same way again. The trial was over. The verdicts were final. Ethan Cross condemned to die. Daniel Miller locked away forever. For investigators, the case file was closed. But outside the courtroom, for families and a city shaken to its core, the aftermath was only beginning. In the weeks following sentencing, vigils lit up across Portland. Candles lined the steps of the downtown arts district, where 5 framed portraits stood side by side. Rachel, Samantha, Jenna, Olivia, and Hannah. Their families gathered shoulder to shoulder, holding hands with strangers, all bound by grief. Emily Harper's parents chose not to attend the vigils. Instead, they created a small memorial on the stage where she once danced. A single spotlight illuminated her ballet shoes, while classmates left flowers across the hardwood floor. Her mother whispered through tears, "We sent her to college to perform, not to be turned into someone else's performance." Some families expressed gratitude for justice served. Others said the sentences brought no comfort. One father told reporters bluntly, "You can execute Cross 100 times, and it still won't bring my daughter back. Justice feels hollow when you bury a child." The Portland arts community felt the deepest shock. Spaces once known for creativity and freedom were now associated with terror. Gallery openings thinned out. Independent photographers and performers reported a sharp decline in bookings. People no longer trusted strangers with artistic opportunities. Universities and art schools introduced stricter background checks for guest lecturers and tightened rules for student collaborations. Safety contracts became standard, requiring clear accountability for off-campus projects. What was once a culture of open, experimental expression had become tinged with caution, even suspicion. Residents near the warehouse district began lobbying city officials to demolish the building altogether. "Every time I walk past it, I see their faces," one local said. The city eventually agreed, and by the following year, the basement gallery of horrors was reduced to rubble. But in the minds of those who knew the story, it was never truly erased. For investigators, too, the scars lingered. Special Agent Marcus Hale admitted privately that this case haunted him more than any before. He spoke of how he still saw the staged bodies every time he stepped into a dimly lit room. "We're trained to see crime scenes," he said, but not when crime scenes are choreographed like theater. Survivor's guilt rippled through the victim's circles of friends. One of Jenna Alvarez's roommates revealed in an interview that she had been offered the same modeling job, but turned it down. "Sometimes I can't sleep," she said. "I wonder why Jenna went instead of me." Psychologists noted a rise in patients reporting hypervigilance after the case. Women in Portland described checking locks 3 or 4 times before bed, refusing rides from acquaintances, and avoiding warehouse districts altogether. Fear had seeped into daily life long after the killers were behind bars. Nationally, the exhibition murders ignited debate over art, freedom, and online extremism. Lawmakers introduced bills targeting dark web platforms that streamed or distributed violent content. Advocacy groups pressed for stricter monitoring of freelance casting calls on social media. But others raised a harder question. How do you legislate against obsession disguised as art? Cross had not broken laws until he killed. Miller had not raised alarms until his lights illuminated corpses. By the time they crossed the line, it was too late. The case also reshaped conversations in creative communities. Many artists pushed back against the idea that disturbing art should be censored, but they acknowledged the danger of unchecked radicalization. "It's not about banning art," one curator said. "It's about recognizing when art is being used as a mask for violence." Years will pass, and people may forget the names of the killers. But in Portland, the memory of that underground gallery of women turned into sculptures remains indelible. Families still visit memorials. Students still hear warnings in classrooms. Be careful who you trust in the name of creativity. For investigators like Marcus Hale, the hardest question lingers. Did justice bring peace? He shakes his head. "Justice gives closure," he says, "but closure isn't healing. Healing is something the system can't deliver." The exhibition murders left more than 5 victims. They left a city scarred, a community cautious, and a culture forever wary of the line between art and violence. The gavel came down. The sentences were read, but the echoes of this case still live in every parent who warns a daughter, in every student who second-guesses a late-night meeting, in every investigator who remembers the eyes of the victims caught in the light. So, we close this file with one question, one that has no easy answer. Can justice ever truly ease the pain?